sure you all had an amazing Purim full of so much spirituality, and I just hope that you all remember that it's not only about the costumes and the shlochmanot, but it's also about really connecting to Hashem and realizing the miracle of God and all He does for us. Anyway, I'm not the one speaking tonight, so I'll stop there. But thank you for coming out. And tonight's speaker is Rabbi Yaakov Wolbe. So, So, I just want to like give a little shout out that I know that a lot of you are probably scared about coming to public places with all that's going on with the coronavirus. So this is a taste of Rabbi Yaakov Wolbe, because he has an amazing podcast. If you haven't heard him yet, and you like what he says tonight, then go and start listening to his podcast, because they're awesome.
Thank you, Taviva, and I'll tell you, the coronavirus is a boon for podcasting, because everyone's going to start listening online, and I wish everyone luck in starting your own podcasts. So before we begin, I want to make a very clear disclaimer. We'll call it 2 disclaimers. Number 1, I am not classically trained in epidemiology. I didn't go to school for medicine. I am not a physician, and I am not dispensing any medical advice, A. B, what I advise everyone to say, what I want to make very clear, abundantly clear before I start, that if you're listening to me, you're listening to me because I guess you're here, or you're watching, or you like what I have to say, and you know that I'm trained in rabbinics and Judaism and Torah, not medicine. And if you want medical advice, go to the medical professionals, go to the CDC, go to the World Health Organization, and not me. With those introductions, I want to talk about the coronavirus. We're told in the Talmud that whenever you encounter something, it's supposed to be a lesson for you. The Baal Shem Tov used to say that the world's like a mirror. Whatever you see, you're supposed to take it inwardly. You're supposed to absorb it. You're supposed to digest it and say, what does it mean for me? Talmud tells us, you see a sota in her disgrace, you right away abstain from wine. You right away make yourself a nazir, because you have to realize that whatever's happening in the world out large, you have to take a lesson for yourself. And I think that applies also with the current pandemic, COVID-19, SARS-19, it's got more names, Wuhan virus, coronavirus. With the current pandemic that's dominating the world and canceling NBA seasons and flights from Europe, etc., I think it's definitely becoming and incumbent upon us to try to say, well, what does the Torah say about it? And I think that there's at least 3 references to how to process the coronavirus from our parsha. I think there's many more lessons, and stay tuned to a podcast on that. But the first verse, this is parsha. That's the first verse. That's more like introductory verse. When you count the Jewish people, what it says is like this. When you count the Jewish people, you don't line them up and just count them. Instead, you ask them for donations, of course, a subject that's near and dear to our hearts. And they give a donation, you count the coins, and the coins serve as a proxy for the people. But if you don't do that, there's going to be a pandemic, there's going to be a plague that's going to destroy them. So I think it's interesting, the Torah, this is Parsha, first verse after the introductory verse. The second verse of the Parsha tells us that there is a kind of pandemic that you can avoid by counting coins instead of people. Now, why do we count coins instead of people? So the commentaries all talk about this. But they explain that when you make a list of people, you just make a census. You don't differentiate between people. Every person's a person. One person, one vote, unless we're in Chicago, right? One person, one vote. That's it. Everyone's the same, right? No. In Judaism, we realize that every person is valuable. Every person is unique. Every person, the Almighty is telling us this world cannot exist without that person. And by the way, what do we do with those coins? those coins are assembled to buy the sacrifices, to buy the korbanot that foster our relationship we have with God. The lesson, I think one of the lessons that we could say, and by the way, I'm going to make suggestions, again, remember my disclaimer, of how to avoid the coronavirus. I'll have 3 of them. The suggestion, perhaps, is that when we count people, we do it by counting the coins. And then we take that money and we use it to foster a relationship that we have with God. Every person, every Jew is needed, or else we cannot have a relationship with God. Maybe this is suggestion number 1. Maybe the lesson that the Almighty is sending us is that we're looking at people and we're just ignoring them. We're a little bit too self-absorbed, self-focused. Other people's lives, well, they're foreigners, they're outsiders, their suffering is their suffering. We don't treat them as individuals, we treat them as statistics. And maybe the Almighty says, okay, I told you how to avoid this. Below you're counting people. You have to count the coins, and you have to realize that every other Jew fosters a relationship that we have with the Almighty, and we're missing one Jew, we don't have that connection. Maybe that's a lesson that the Almighty is trying to send us. And as a result, if we take the lesson home, and we say, every one of our brethren is valuable, every one of our brethren is necessary to foster that relationship with the Almighty, maybe that's a prophylactic against coronavirus. That's suggestion A. Suggestion B comes from our parsha as well. The Almighty tells Moshe, make a kior, make a washing basin, that the Kohanim, when they walk into the Mishkan, when they walk into the tabernacle, they wash their hands and their feet. I found it striking that you look at the World Health Organization, the Center for Disease and Control, everyone that talks about how to maintain your safety and how to prevent the transmission of this disease, everyone has the same number 1 suggestion: wash your hands. It just struck me, that's the advice that we've been talking about for thousands of years. And here from the parsha tells you, you gotta wash your hands, you gotta wash your hands, you gotta wash your hands. If you don't wash your hands, you're gonna die. It's not me, I said that. What does it say? It's a clear verse in our parsha. That the Kohanim are told, when you walk into the Mishkan, you have to wash your hands and not die. And that's what we're told. You open up the news and read any story, wash your hands and don't die. By the way, in the 14th century, there was a plague that ravaged much of the world. And the Jews, of course, were blamed. We poisoned the wells, allegedly. This is the Black Plague, the bubonic plague. That's correct. The reason why the Jews weathered that plague better than anyone else, it's because we have this obsession with wash your hands. You wake up in the morning, you wash your hands. You're about to eat, you wash your hands. You go to the bathroom, you wash your hands.
We clean our houses.
It's an amazing insight that we knew this for such a long time already. We're good hygiene, but it's not that. It's a mitzvah. It's more than just good hygiene.
I understand that, but
and this I can say, by the way, this is not just my suggestion, the Torah suggestion. This is what the Torah and the scientists agree. And I would add, I saw recently that the Chazon Ish, who was one of the greatest Jews of the 20th century, he said that the number 1 thing you gotta teach children is not to not eat milk or meat together. It's not to keep Shabbos. What's the number 1 thing you gotta teach kids? To wash your hands. That's the number 1 thing you gotta teach children, which is astonishing. It's so important, and I think that this is something that we can say with confidence. The Torah and the scientists agree that if you wash your hands, maintain hand cleanliness, that's another way to save yourself from this terrible disease. I want to talk about the end of the parsha, because the parsha tells us about, of course, this terrible sin of the Jewish people, the golden calf, the Egel Hazav. And as a result of that sin, there is distance between the Jewish people and the Almighty. And there's an amazing Rashi. Every year I like to revisit this Rashi when it talks about Moshe coming down from the mountain. And his face is aglow. His face is as radiant, as resplendent as the sun. And the nation was terrified to approach him. He was so scary, they had to look away, they had to veer away from him. He was terrifying to them. So look at this Rashi. Bo'u re'eh, come and see. Kama gadol kocho shel avera. How strong, how powerful is the strength, is the influence, the effect of sin. Before the people sinned, before they did the Eid al-Azab, before they did the golden calf, what does the verse say? That the Jewish people witnessed the visage, so to speak, of God on the mountain, and it was like a fire to the eyes of the Jewish people. They're not scared, they have no trepidation, they're not trembling at all. And what happens? Once they did the sin, even from the luminous visage of Moshe, they were terrified and they had to look away. I think there is no greater example to what sin does to you than this coronavirus. So first of all, I noticed that coronavirus, what does corona mean? Corona is not a beer. Corona means a crown. That's right. Every sin, it starts off as a corona. You're like, oh my gosh, it's a crown, it's so exciting. It's appealing, it's alluring, it is desirable in your eyes. But ultimately you realize it's a virus that's going to kill you. And in fact, the pathology of this particular virus is that it implants itself in your lungs, not your lungs, God forbid, in someone's lungs, and it kills them from within. And that is identical to how our sages describe sin. Sin, like the virus, is invisible. And there's no appreciable, visible difference between someone who hasn't sinned and someone who has. And they look identical to us. Just like there's no appreciable difference between someone who's, God forbid, infected with this terrible disease and someone who is not infected by the disease. You only notice the consequences later. And our sages explain that what the sin does is that it lashes onto someone's soul to the degree that it could even kill them. The Talmud says that Rishayim, the wicked ones, the sinners, even when they're alive, they're truly dead. Even though they're still alive, nominally. But they're dead because their soul has been infected and has been sullied and has been effectively killed by the sin. Just as the coronavirus comes inside someone's body, you don't even notice it, and it takes over, God forbid, kills someone. Sin does the exact same thing for the soul. So this is advice I think that would apply to any malady facing us whenever we do suffer, God forbid. It's always a clarion call for us to make sure that our behavior, our deeds, our actions are okay, not only in the eyes of our fellow man, but in the eyes of the Almighty. So those are my thoughts about how to avoid coronavirus from our parsha. Some nice lessons. And again, treat others as individuals. Don't just see people as just generic humanoids, generic Homo sapiens. In addition, wash your hands, and that's a very important mitzvah. You gotta wash your hands in the morning. We do it 4 times, one in each hand. When you wash to have food, you wash twice to the right, twice to the left. Go to the bathroom, you wash your hands. That's a very important thing. And also, if we avoid sin, that is a wonderful elixir of life to protect us from any sort of maladies. May the Almighty watch over all of us and all of our Jewish brethren and all of our brethren in Israel to be spared from this trouble, from this suffering, from this malady, and from any other maladies. Thank you.